Tom Williams was born into a modest family in a small town in North Carolina. His father worked long hours as a mechanic, and his mother was a school teacher. From an early age, Tom displayed a knack for leadership, often stepping up to defend classmates from bullies or rally his friends for impromptu baseball games. The small-town values of honesty, loyalty, and resilience shaped him deeply. By the time Tom graduated high school, he was set on joining the Marines. Inspired by an uncle who had served in Vietnam, he wanted to protect others and see the world. His parents were initially hesitant, but eventually supported his decision, proud of his determination. Boot camp was grueling, but Tom thrived under the discipline and structure, quickly earning respect among his peers. During his early years in the Marines, Tom's life took a pivotal turn. Stationed in Okinawa, Japan, he found himself in the thick of a tense hostage situation. His calm demeanor and quick thinking during the negotiation earned him a commendation, as well as a newfound interest in law enforcement. The experience planted the seeds for his dream of becoming a detective. When his tour ended, Tom returned stateside with a clear goal. He enrolled in a criminal justice program, juggling studies with a part-time job as a security guard. His time in college was marked by rigorous study sessions, late-night shifts, and growing camaraderie with fellow students who shared his ambition. Among them was Julia, a sharp, ambitious business major who quickly caught his eye. Julia was everything Tom admired: intelligent, witty, and fiercely driven. She had dreams of working in corporate finance and was relentless in her pursuit of success. Despite their different career paths, they bonded over a shared love of classic films and long walks in the park. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a simple courthouse wedding just before their graduation ceremonies. Shortly after their marriage, life moved quickly. Tom secured a position as the emergency dispatcher while awaiting entry into the police academy, and Julia landed a coveted role at a prestigious investment firm. They rented a cozy apartment in the suburbs, balancing the excitement of their budding careers with the challenges of building a life together. It was during this time that Julia's frequent work trips to the East Coast began, trips that would later intertwine fatefully with Tom's path. Tom relaxed on the patio, glancing at the door as he waited for Julia, his wife of nearly 20 years, affectionately called Julie. Across from him sat Sarah Miles, a close friend and co-worker. Tom exhaled a puff of smoke, stubbed out his cigarette, sipped his coffee, and lit another. "How are you holding up, Tom?" Sarah asked gently. He shook his head. "Not great, but I'm glad you're here." "That's what friends are for," she replied warmly. Tom's thoughts drifted back 22 years. Newly married, he'd just left the Marines, where he served as a military police officer. Dreaming of becoming a detective, he used his benefits to study criminal justice in college, where he met Julia, a business student. The connection was instant. Tom's commanding presence and Julia's charm made them inseparable. They married after graduation. Julia, 5 years younger, had been briefly engaged before meeting Tom. She shared little about her ex, who moved to New York, and Tom didn't ask. During his Marine days, Tom was a free spirit, but Julia changed that. She was the one. After the wedding, Tom waited 6 months to join the police academy, working as an emergency dispatcher in the meantime. Julia started a career at a national investment firm. Together, they managed to rent a modest apartment and were happy. Her job required occasional East Coast trips, which Tom disliked, but one trip brought big news. Julia was pregnant. Their son Andrew was born shortly after Tom graduated from the academy. 2 years later, their daughter Marie arrived after a difficult birth. Julia convinced Tom to get a vasectomy. Both children inherited Julia's blonde hair and blue eyes, prompting Tom's mother to once suggest a DNA test. Tom refused, firmly trusting Julia. 5 years into his career, Tom excelled in the detective exam, earning a swift promotion. With Julia's income, they upgraded to a cozy 3-bedroom home in a nice neighborhood. Life seemed perfect. At one of Julia's company Christmas parties held at a Marriott, Tom met Alf Henriksen, a New York manager. Alf's blonde hair and blue eyes bore an uncanny resemblance to Julia's, unsettling Tom. "It's great to meet you," Alf said, shaking Tom's hand. "I hear you made detective. Congrats." "Thanks," Tom replied, wary of Alf's smug demeanor. Alf smirked. "Julie didn't tell you? We were engaged in high school before I moved to New York." "I see," Tom said evenly. "It's good to finally meet you," Alf added. "Heard you earned a Silver Star in Iraq." Tom nodded curtly. "Just doing my duty." Alf's smile lingered. "The stronger man won, I guess." Tom stayed composed, though the encounter left a lasting impression. Tom spent the evening watching Julia closely, especially when she danced with Alf. While nothing about their interaction was overtly inappropriate, Tom couldn't shake the unease Alf's presence stirred. At the end of the night, Alf made a point of saying goodbye. "It was wonderful to see you again, Julie," he said warmly, then turned to Tom. "And a real pleasure meeting you, sir." "Likewise," Tom replied, his tone flat. The car ride home was tense until Tom broke the silence. "Was that the guy you were engaged to before we met?" Julia hesitated before answering softly. "Yes, that was him." "Don't you think it might have been important to tell me you work with your ex-fiancé?" Tom asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "He's based in New York, Tom," she explained. "We hardly see each other, and he's in a different department. But you're right, I should have told you. I'm sorry." Tom sighed, his tone softening. "It's okay. So, what happened between you two?" Julia smiled faintly. "I wanted a family, marriage, kids, a home. He didn't. When he moved to New York, he made it clear he wasn't ready to settle down. That's when I ended it." "Do you regret it?" Tom asked. "Not at all," she said, her smile brightening. "I have everything I've ever wanted." She took his hand and kissed his knuckles. "And right now," she said affectionately, "I'd love for you to take me to bed." Tom chuckled, his earlier unease fading. "Your wish is my command." After that night, Alf didn't come up again. Julia's business trips continued, but Tom never noticed anything to suggest she was unfaithful. She remained devoted, and their life together flourished. Over time, Tom met other colleagues from Julia's office, but none unsettled him like Alf. Tom, a seasoned police officer and now a lieutenant, prided himself on his keen observational skills. Yet something about Julia's workplace occasionally nagged at him. Her colleagues were always polite, but there was a subtle tension in their demeanor. Among them, Alice stood out. Years earlier, Alice and her husband had witnessed a robbery that Tom resolved, and they had testified courageously in court. Since then, Tom occasionally checked in on her. Recently, however, Alice's behavior had changed. At events, her glances seemed strained, carrying a quiet unease similar to what Tom had noticed in others at Julia's workplace. At first, he dismissed it, but a growing sense of discomfort lingered in the back of his mind. One day, determined to get to the bottom of things, Tom decided to visit Julia's office unannounced. As he walked in, Alice intercepted him before he could reach Julia's desk. "Julia just stepped out," she said quickly. Tom raised an eyebrow. "Do you know when she'll be back?" "She mentioned needing to drop something off at the legal department." "It might take a while," Alice replied, her tone hesitant. Tom studied her. "Is everything okay, Alice? How are you and your husband doing?" "We're fine," she said, then hesitated before blurting. "But I'm curious. Did you know Julie was seeing Alf while she was back east?" Tom froze, his stomach tightening. "That's not true. Why would you ask something like that?" Alice avoided his gaze. "I just assumed you knew. You two have an open marriage, right? Because of your injury?" Tom frowned, his confusion deepening. "What injury?" Alice's face paled slightly. She said you were injured on duty and couldn't, you know." Tom's expression darkened. "Alice, I've never been injured on duty, and I'm fine. If you have something to back up these claims, now would be the time to share." After a long pause, Alice nodded. "I have photos on my phone. I took them during one of our trips east. I thought you should know." Tom handed her his card, scribbling his email on the back. "Send them to me." Alice nodded solemnly. "I've seen them together multiple times. It's been going on for years." "For how long?" Tom asked, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. 5, maybe 6 years, Alice admitted quietly. Tom's jaw tightened. "Keep this between us. Don't tell Julie I was here." "Of course," Alice replied. "I'll send the photos now." Tom left the office, his mind racing. Had Julia really been unfaithful all these years? He tried to replay the past, searching for signs he might have missed, but nothing stood out. She had always seemed devoted, calling him nightly during her trips, and showing no obvious changes in her demeanor. But now, he questioned everything. Minutes later, his phone buzzed with Alice's email. The photos were clear and devastating. One showed Julia and Alf locked in a passionate kiss on the dance floor. Another captured Alf's hand on her bare thigh beneath a skirt Tom didn't recognize. The final image hit him the hardest. Julia and Alf entering an elevator, her face tilted toward his, her expression unmistakably filled with longing. Tom's chest tightened, and tears blurred his vision. The betrayal cut deeper than he'd ever imagined. Back at his office, Tom found it impossible to concentrate. The crime board on the wall, a tool that usually brought him clarity, seemed meaningless now. After a futile attempt to work, he decided to call it a day. As he was leaving, a fellow detective caught sight of him. "You doing okay, Lieutenant?" the detective asked, concerned. Tom forced a faint smile. "Just some heartburn. See you tomorrow." At home, Tom grabbed a beer and powered up his computer. Checking Julia's calendar, he noticed her next trip east was scheduled in 2 days and would last a week. He transferred the photos from his phone to his computer and enhanced them, zooming in to scrutinize Alf's face. His chest tightened as realization dawned. The resemblance was undeniable. Pulling out photos of Andrew and Marie, Tom compared them side by side with the image of Alf. Andrew could have been Alf's twin, and even Marie shared striking similarities. Fighting back a wave of nausea, Tom steadied himself. He knew what had to be done. Without hesitation, he contacted a DNA testing service and arranged to pick up a kit that same day. Just as he was about to leave, his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Julia's name. "Hi," Tom answered, keeping his voice calm despite the turmoil churning inside. "Hey," Julia said, her tone concerned. "Are you okay? You sound a little off." "I'm fine," he replied evenly, masking his unease. "Just dealing with a tough case and some stomach issues. What's up?" "I'll be working late tonight to prepare for the trip," Julia explained. "We're going out for dinner afterwards, so I won't be home until late, probably after 11. Can you handle the kids?" "Of course," Tom said, his tone steady. "Thanks so much," she said with audible relief. "Make sure they're in bed by 9:30. They've got tests tomorrow." "Will do," Tom assured her. "You're the best," Julia said warmly. "Love you." "Love you too," Tom replied before ending the call. As he set the phone down, Tom realized the hardest part of this ordeal wouldn't be finding the truth, but pretending nothing was wrong. If Julia had truly deceived him for their entire marriage, he would need to handle this methodically, like any investigation, calm, objective, and thorough. That evening, he picked up the DNA kit and returned home before the kids arrived. He hated the deception, but knew he'd need to collect the samples after they were asleep to avoid raising suspicion. For now, the truth would have to wait. Scrolling through his contacts, Tom found the name he needed, Roger Dunleavy. Roger, a former detective, had retired and moved back to New York to run a private investigation firm specializing in infidelity cases. Hoping to catch him in his office, Tom dialed the number. "Dunleavy and Associates?" Roger answered, his familiar voice brisk but friendly. "Roger, you old dog," Tom said, forcing a chuckle. "Tom Williams, long time, no hear," Roger replied warmly. "What's new?" "Not much," Tom said, striving to keep his tone casual. "How's business?" "Busy," Roger said with a laugh. "Turns out there are plenty of wandering spouses out there. What's going on? Finally decided to ditch the force and join the private sector?" "Not quite," Tom replied. "But I might have a job for you if you're willing to take it." Roger's tone shifted, becoming serious. "Tom, you're not about to tell me you think Julia's cheating, are you?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Tom admitted, his voice weighted with emotion. "And if I'm right, it's been happening for years." "Damn, Tom. That's rough," Roger said, his sympathy evident. "What do you need?" "She'll be in New York for a week starting Friday," Tom explained. "I'll send you her itinerary, along with photos of her and the guy I suspect." "You want the works?" Roger asked. "Photos, video, audio, a full report?" "Everything," Tom said firmly. "I need to know everything." Roger paused before responding. "Tom, you've had my back more times than I can count. Just cover my expenses and we'll call it even." "I don't want to take advantage," Tom said. "Don't argue with me," Roger replied, his New York accent thick. "You'd do the same for me." Tom couldn't help but smile. "Thanks, Roger. You're a good friend." Roger chuckled. "Now you're catching on. Send me her details and photos and I'll take care of the rest." "I'll send them over tonight," Tom promised. "Thanks again." "Anytime, buddy. We'll talk soon," Roger said before hanging up. Just as the call ended, the kids came home from school. "Pizza for dinner?" Tom asked as they walked through the door. "Yeah," they cheered. "Mom's going away again, isn't she?" Andrew asked. "She leaves Friday and will be gone for a week," Tom confirmed. "A whole week?" Marie said, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Yes, a week," Tom said, ignoring the attitude. "So, behave yourselves. Remember, I'm armed and I've got handcuffs," he joked, earning laughter from both kids. He ordered pizza, and they ate together in the living room while watching TV. As they finished, Tom asked, "Are you ready for tomorrow's tests?" "Almost," Marie said. Andrew nodded. "Well, you should hit the books before bed," Tom suggested. Mom lets us stay up until 10 before tests, Andrew protested. Nice try, Tom said with a smirk. Lights out at 9. Shouldn't it be lights out at 9 o'clock, sir? Marie teased. You're absolutely correct, Tom replied with mock authority. Now get moving. The kids grabbed their books and headed upstairs. Watching them go, Tom felt a pang of sadness. They were great kids, and he loved them deeply. He just hoped the truth, when it came out, wouldn't tear their world apart. Back in his office, Tom pulled out a blank notebook, determined to treat the situation like a professional case. If he was going to uncover the truth, he needed to keep detailed records. He began by jotting down everything Alice had told him and printing out the photos she'd sent, carefully attaching them to the pages. Next, he added pictures of Andrew and Marie, lining them up beside the enhanced images of Alf. The resemblance was undeniable. Beneath the photos, he wrote a single word: paternity. He opened his calendar and began cross-referencing Julia's quarterly trips with the timelines of both pregnancies. The dates matched too perfectly to be coincidence. His mind drifted back to their conversation after the party where he'd met Alf. Julia's words echoed bitterly in his head. I have everything a girl could dream of. Yeah, Tom muttered under his breath. Everything. A life in New York with him and a fool at home raising your kids. His jaw tightened. Damn you, Julie. By 9:45 p.m., he closed the notebook and locked it securely in his desk drawer. Taking the DNA test kit, he quietly checked on the kids. Their lights were off, and both were sound asleep. Moving with care, he collected the necessary DNA samples, kissed each of them on the forehead, and ensured they were tucked in before leaving their rooms. In the quiet of his study, Tom added his own DNA sample to the kit, filled out the accompanying paperwork, and packed everything into his briefcase. Leaning back in his chair, he let his thoughts race. If Julia had been unfaithful, divorce was inevitable. But what would come next? Custody battles, child support, alimony. These questions loomed large. And what about the possibility of fraud? If Julia had knowingly listed him as the father while knowing Alf might be the biological parent, could she be held accountable? What the hell have you done, Julie? He whispered into the stillness. Tom climbed into bed but couldn't sleep. When Julia came home just before midnight, he was still wide awake. You're still up? She asked, sitting beside him. Couldn't sleep, he said curtly. Do you want to talk about it? It's the case I'm working on, he lied. A guy comes home, finds out his whole marriage was a lie, and discovers the kids he's been raising aren't his. Oh my God, Julia said, her hand flying to her mouth. What happened? Tom feigned anger. He eliminated her, then the kids, then himself. She stared at him, horrified. That poor man. Tom glanced at her, his expression unreadable. I can't even imagine how he must have felt. After a pause, Julia leaned closer. You know I love you, right? She asked softly. Yeah, Tom replied. And you believe me? Of course, he said without hesitation. Good, she said, her tone lightening. By the way, I'm leaving a day early. I'll head out tomorrow instead. What? Why? Tom asked, unable to hide his surprise. I need to settle a few things before the meetings start. I left my itinerary on the kitchen table. Tom forced a nod, masking his irritation. I was hoping to spend some time with you before you left. I'm sorry, she said, heading to the bathroom. I really need a shower. As soon as the door closed, Tom grabbed her purse and fished out her phone. He tried her usual passcode, but it didn't work. She'd changed it. When did you change this? He muttered, his unease growing. Setting the phone back, he rifled through her purse. His fingers brushed against a small box, and he pulled it out. Plan B. The label read, Emergency Contraceptive. Tom's stomach dropped. Julia had always said she stayed on birth control for health reasons, but this was something else entirely. His mind raced through the implications. There was no reason for her to have this unless she was hiding something. He snapped a photo of the box with his phone, carefully returned it to her purse, and crawled back into bed. When Julia emerged from the bathroom, her hair damp and fragrant with lavender soap, she slipped into bed beside him, snuggling close. Normally, Tom would have held her, pulling her into his arms, but tonight he turned away, inching toward the edge of the mattress. Startled by his rejection, Julia withdrew, her confusion palpable. In the dim light, he could feel her staring at his back. Does he know? She wondered, tears stinging her eyes. But she said nothing, and neither did he. The silence between them was deafening. The next morning, Tom was distant and cold. He avoided speaking to Julia as she packed, instead immersing himself in his usual routine. After showering, shaving, and dressing, he poured himself coffee and spotted the itinerary she had left on the kitchen counter. Picking it up, he studied it briefly before tucking it into his briefcase. Without a word, he walked the kids to school, keeping his face impassive. When he returned home, Julia was waiting by the door. "Aren't you going to kiss me goodbye?" she asked, her voice almost pleading. Tom paused, his hand on the doorknob. Turning, he met her gaze for a long moment. "Call me when you get there," he said flatly. "Tom, I really do love you," she said, her tone soft and insistent. "Uh-huh," he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "I know." He opened the door and left, leaving her standing there, confused and hurt. "This must be weighing on him more than I thought," she reasoned. Once at his desk, Tom scanned her itinerary and forwarded it, along with the photos of her and Alf, to Roger. He also dropped off the DNA samples for processing and scheduled a meeting with Lucy Hawkins, a no-nonsense divorce attorney known for her aggressive tactics. If it came to that, Tom wanted to be prepared for whatever lay ahead. Determined to stay productive, Tom tried to refocus on his work. For a while, it seemed like he had regained a sliver of control, until his phone buzzed with a call from Captain Smith. "Williams, get to my office, now!" Smith barked. Tom let out a weary sigh, rising from his desk. As he walked through the precinct, his colleagues exchanged questioning glances, sensing something was off. Entering the captain's office, Tom closed the door as instructed and took a seat. Smith leaned against his desk, his arms folded. The normally gruff captain's tone was uncharacteristically gentle. "Okay, Tom, what's going on?" Tom hesitated before finally speaking. "I think my wife is cheating on me," he admitted quietly. Smith's eyebrows lifted in surprise, but he waited patiently for more. Tom exhaled deeply, the words tasting bitter as he said them. "And it's not just recent. I believe it's been happening for our entire marriage. There's a chance, a real chance. The kids might not even be mine." Smith's expression darkened as he ran a hand over his face. "Jesus, Tom, I don't even know what to say. I'm sorry." "I've already got wheels in motion," Tom said. "I've hired a private investigator, set up a DNA test, and I'm meeting with Lucy Hawkins this afternoon." "Good," Smith said with a nod. "You're doing the right thing, but you should also talk to Dr. Wilkerson." "The department psychologist?" Tom asked, his brows knitting together. "Yeah, you're one of my best. But this is a lot for anyone to handle. You need someone to help you process this so it doesn't bleed into your work. Trust me on this." Reluctantly, Tom nodded. "All right, thanks, Cap." Smith offered a small, encouraging smile. "You'll get through this, Tom. Just keep your priorities straight. Now get out of here before I start charging you rent for loitering." Tom gave a faint smirk and left the office, heading directly to Dr. Donna Wilkerson's office. When he arrived, she greeted him with her signature warmth and a knowing look. Well, well, Tom Williams graces me with his presence. This must be serious." "It is," Tom replied, sinking into a chair. "I wouldn't be here otherwise." Donna listened intently as Tom detailed everything, his suspicions, the evidence, and his next steps. "But you don't have hard proof yet?" she asked. "Not yet," Tom said. "That's why I'm working with a private investigator and waiting on the DNA results." "Have you consulted a lawyer?" Donna asked. "Yes, Lucy Hawkins." Donna nodded approvingly. "Smart choice. But Tom, this isn't just about you. If your suspicions are confirmed, it's going to rock your kids' world. You're the only father they've ever known." "I've thought about that," Tom said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I've always taught them the importance of honesty. I can't keep this from them if it's true." Donna placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Remember this, Tom. Biology doesn't make a father. You're their dad no matter what the test says." Tom gave a solemn nod. "Thanks, Donna. I won't forget that." Later that afternoon, Tom met with Lucy Hawkins in her office. He laid everything on the table, the photos, his suspicions, the DNA test, and the private investigator's involvement. Lucy listened carefully, her sharp legal mind already piecing together a strategy. "We'll wait for the test results and the investigator's findings," she said. "If your suspicions are correct, this goes beyond infidelity. If she knowingly listed you as the father while suspecting otherwise, we could pursue charges of paternity fraud." "Paternity fraud? That's a thing?" Tom asked, surprised. "It is," Lucy confirmed. "And in this state, it's taken very seriously. Depending on the details, we might even look at perjury if she's ever lied about this under oath." Tom shook his head, overwhelmed by the implications. "This is going to get messy." "It already is," Lucy replied bluntly. "But we'll handle it. For now, don't tip her off. Let her dig her own grave." Tom left the meeting feeling a mix of resolve and dread. When he got home, his phone rang. It was Roger. "Hey, Tom, how are you holding up?" Roger asked. Tom sighed, sinking into a chair. "Hanging in there. Julie's probably on her way to New York by now. I just met with my lawyer. We're holding off on any moves until the evidence comes in." "Smart," Roger said. "I managed to set up a camera in her hotel room. It's motion and voice activated, and it streams directly to a private server. I'll send you the IP address and login info so you can monitor it in real time." Tom grabbed a pen and jotted down the details. "Thanks, Roger. I owe you." "Forget it," Roger replied. "I'll be tracking her when she lands. We'll touch base soon." After hanging up, Tom immediately logged into the camera feed. The screen showed a blank room, pristine and untouched, but the sight of it filled him with a gnawing unease. Meanwhile, Julie sat by the airplane window, gazing out at the clouds. Her thoughts wandered back to the last 20 years. On the surface, her marriage to Tom seemed perfect. He was everything she thought she'd wanted, strong, devoted, and an amazing father to their children. He had taught Andrew and Marie life skills, instilled discipline, and shown them unconditional love. But even as Julie reflected on Tom's virtues, she couldn't escape the weight of her secret. She had convinced herself over the years that her actions were justified. Alf had been her first love, and the chemistry they shared had never truly faded. His charisma and commanding presence had been intoxicating even after all these years. Alf had always been clear about his disdain for fatherhood and commitment, which was why their engagement had fallen apart. But part of Julie had never stopped longing for him. When Alf left for New York, she thought she'd moved on. Then, Tom came into her life, a man who treated her like royalty and offered the stability Alf never could. She married Tom quickly, determined to leave the past behind. Yet the moment Alf re-entered her life, those old feelings resurfaced, bringing with them a dangerous temptation she could no longer ignore. Despite her life with Tom, Julie had never truly let Alf go. Their connection rekindled shortly after she started at Apex Financials, a position she had secured thanks to Alf's glowing recommendation. Their affair reignited during her very first quarterly meeting in New York. Julie knew the stakes, but she meticulously crafted a facade to keep Tom oblivious. She called him nightly during her trips, ensured she looked flawless upon her return, and maintained the rhythm of their family life as though nothing had changed. Julie had even orchestrated her pregnancies. While she and Tom had agreed she'd remain on birth control until they were ready for children, she had secretly stopped taking her pills before her trips to New York. She wanted Alf's children and made sure her plan succeeded. When Tom initiated closeness during those times, she would feign illness or claim to be on her period, avoiding any chance of conceiving with him. When Julie became pregnant with Andrew, Tom had been ecstatic, though surprised. She explained the pregnancy as a rare failure of her birth control, and Tom believed her without question. Alf, knowing the truth, had agreed to let Tom be Andrew's father in all but biology. The same pattern unfolded with Marie's birth. After Marie's complicated delivery, Julie persuaded Tom to get a vasectomy, citing her health as the priority. This removed any possibility of accidental conception with Tom, allowing her to carry on her affair without concern. For years, Julie and Alf met discreetly during her quarterly trips. At first, they were cautious to avoid suspicion at work, but over time, their closeness became harder to ignore. About 5 years ago, Alice, a newer member of Julie's team, confronted her after noticing the dynamic between her and Alf. "Julie, I'm just going to say it," Alice had pressed. "Are you and Alf involved?" Julie didn't miss a beat, crafting a lie on the spot. "Yes, but it's not what you think. Tom knows. We have an open marriage. He's fine with it as long as it's kept out of town." Alice frowned, skeptical. "That doesn't sound like the Tom I've heard about," Julie sighed, feigning vulnerability. "Tom was injured in the line of duty. It left him unable to, well, he's embarrassed about it, so please don't bring it up. It would devastate him." Though hesitant, Alice had reluctantly agreed to keep quiet. But the lie had left a sour taste in her mouth. Julie's thoughts were interrupted by the announcement that the plane was beginning its descent into LaGuardia. She straightened her seat, fastened her belt, and prepared to land. At home, Tom sat motionless in front of his computer. waiting for the live feed from the hotel room to activate. According to her itinerary, Julie's flight had already landed, and she should be arriving at the hotel soon. The screen flickered and the camera came to life. Tom's heart sank as he saw Julie wheel her suitcase into the room. Moments later, Alf entered behind her. Tom's hands clenched the desk as he studied the scene. Alf's features were unmistakable. Andrew's face stared back at him, aged 2 decades. He watched as Julie embraced Alf, their connection clear in every movement. His worst fears materialized in vivid detail. As the two kissed and fell onto the bed, Tom turned away from the screen, his stomach churning. For a moment, he composed himself, then forced himself to continue watching. He needed to see this through. When they were finished, Julie's voice cut through the silence. "I really needed that." "Same here," Alf replied casually. "So, how's the deputy husband?" "Don't call him that," Julie said sharply. "Tom is a respected officer." "Sure," Alf said, smirking. "Respected enough to have no clue his wife's been sleeping with me for years. The guy's been raising my kids, and he doesn't even know it. Maybe I should send him a Father's Day card." "Don't you dare," Julie snapped, swatting his arm. "Why do you have to be so cruel?" "When are you going to leave him?" Alf asked, his tone serious now. "Not until the kids are out of the house," Julie said. "Maybe after Tom retires. That way I'll still get part of his pension." Alf leaned back, studying her. "I've been thinking, what if you transferred to my department? That way we could be together all the time." Julie hesitated, then said, "Maybe once the kids are older. Marie's almost 17, so it won't be long." Alf nodded. "After all these years, what's another couple? But I'd like to meet the kids at some point." "We agreed, Alf," Julie said firmly. "From the beginning, we decided you wouldn't have contact with them." "I know," he said. "But after the divorce, maybe?" "Maybe," Julie conceded. Alf glanced at his watch. "We should get ready for dinner. We have a reservation." Julie stretched and stood. "I'll shower and change. See you downstairs in half an hour?" "See you then," Alf said, pulling her close for another kiss. "I love you." "I love you too," Julie replied, using the same words she so often said to Tom. Tom sat frozen as if paralyzed. His worst suspicions were no longer just theories. They were fact. He watched as Alf left the room and Julie picked up her phone. A moment later, his own phone buzzed. He stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hello?" he said, his voice flat. "Hey, Tom. Just wanted to let you know I made it safely," Julie said, her tone cheerful. "Good," Tom replied curtly. "How's the case going?" she asked. "Making progress," he said, bitterness barely veiled. "I'm close to nailing down my main suspect." "That's great," Julie said brightly. "I know how much it's been weighing on you." "You have no idea," Tom muttered. "Well, I'm off to dinner now, but I'll call you tomorrow." "Love you," she chirped. Tom's voice was emotionless. "Sure, I'll tell the kids you called." Ending the call, Tom stared at the blank screen. Julie's words echoed in his head, hollow and meaningless. He had everything he needed to confirm the truth. But for the first time, he wondered what his next move would be. Tom ensured the video was saved securely on his hard drive before shutting off the monitor. By the time he returned to the living room, Andrew and Marie were home from school. Greeting them warmly, he masked the storm raging inside. His demeanor gave no hint of the unraveling truth he now carried. The following morning, Tom received a call from the DNA lab. The results were ready. He drove to the lab, picked up the sealed envelope, and opened it in his car. The confirmation he feared hit him like a sledgehammer. Neither Andrew nor Marie was biologically his. Despite the pain threatening to engulf him, he pulled himself together and headed straight to Lucy Hawkins' office, clutching the DNA results and a copy of the video evidence. Lucy reviewed the documents meticulously before speaking. "The DNA results are significant," she said. "This gives us a strong foundation. But the video, we can't use it in court. It wasn't obtained through legal means." Tom nodded, his expression grim. "I figured as much." "Even so," Lucy continued, "we have enough to move forward. We'll file for divorce citing infidelity and fraud. While this is a community property state, judges often consider infidelity during asset division." "What about paternity fraud?" Tom asked. "That's a bit more complicated," Lucy admitted. "We need her to admit she knowingly falsified the birth certificates. A confession, ideally in front of witnesses, would bolster your case." "I'll figure out a way to get her to admit it," Tom said, determination hardening his voice. "Good. Come back on Wednesday, and we'll plan our next steps," Lucy said. That evening, Julie called as usual, her tone affectionate and sweet. Tom kept his responses brief, avoiding any declarations of love. After they ended the call, he turned back to his computer monitor. The feed showed Julie slipping into bed beside Alf. His jaw tightened, but he continued watching, knowing the evidence would be invaluable later. On Wednesday, Tom met with Lucy again. This time, District Attorney Marvin Morrison and Deputy Sarah Miles joined the meeting. Marvin laid out a clear plan. "We need a confession," Marvin said firmly. "If she admits to falsifying the birth certificates, we can use that to build a stronger case." "She's coming home Saturday morning," Tom said. "I'll make sure the kids aren't in the house." "Good call," Marvin replied. "We'll have Deputy Miles standing by to serve the divorce papers and, if necessary, arrest her." Tom nodded, determined. "Understood." That evening, when Julie called, Tom asked casually, "You're still planning to come back Saturday morning, right?" "Yes, of course," she replied. "Great," Tom said evenly. "We should do something special when you're back." "That sounds nice," she said. "You know I love and miss you, right?" "I know," Tom replied, his tone neutral. "You don't sound very convincing," she pressed. "You haven't told me you love me all week." "I loved you," Tom said, emphasizing the past tense. "Good night." Julie hesitated but said, "Good night," before hanging up. She stared at her phone, her expression troubled. Tom smiled faintly, knowing her worry was just beginning. That Friday, Tom packed bags for Andrew and Marie and drove them to their grandparents' house. The children were confused and questioned why they couldn't stay home. "Mom's coming back tomorrow morning," Andrew pointed out. "I need to talk to her alone," Tom said gently. "I'll explain everything to you both in the afternoon." Marie's voice wavered. "Are you divorcing her?" "Please tell me you're not." Tom's face softened, though his heart ached. "It's not something I can stop." "Did you cheat on her?" Marie asked sharply. "No," Tom said firmly. "I've never even thought about another woman during our marriage." Andrew frowned. "So she cheated on you?" Tom sighed. "I'll explain everything tomorrow. For now, just trust me." The ride was silent, except for Marie's quiet tears. When they arrived, Julie's mother, Maggie, met them at the door, concern etched across her face. "What's going on, Tom?" Maggie asked. "Why is Marie crying?" Tom rested a hand on her shoulder. "I need to have a serious conversation with Julie in the morning. I'll explain everything to you after." "You're not going to hurt her, are you?" Maggie asked, her tone wary. "No," Tom said firmly. "But there are things you need to know." "You're divorcing her, aren't you?" Maggie pressed. "Yes," Tom admitted, "and for good reason. I'll explain tomorrow." Maggie reluctantly nodded. "You'd better." That night, Tom watched the live feed. Julie sat beside Alf, laughing as they talked. The sight stirred a storm of emotions, but he forced himself to stay composed. Picking up his phone, he dialed her number. "Hi, Tom," Julie answered, her tone bright. "Are you still on schedule to be home tomorrow morning?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "How's the case going?" "Almost wrapped up," Tom said. "By this time tomorrow, the suspect will be in custody." "Good," Julie said cheerfully. "Then maybe things will go back to normal." "Maybe," Tom replied flatly. "We'll talk in the morning." He ended the call and returned his gaze to the monitor. Julie stared at her phone, tears brimming in her eyes. Tom leaned back in his chair, a grim smile forming. "Tomorrow," he muttered. "Everything changes tomorrow." Tom stood on the back porch, finishing his cigarette as the sun began to rise. At exactly 7:30 a.m., Sarah arrived, stepping out of her patrol car with a determined expression. Together, they prepared for the confrontation, ensuring everything was ready. By 7:45, Julie's car pulled into the garage. Tom watched silently as she walked toward the house, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. She pushed open the door leading to the back deck. "Tom?" she called, her voice confused. "What's going on? Who's this? And why is there a patrol car in the driveway? Where are the kids?" Tom stood calmly. "The kids are with your mother," he said evenly. "This is Deputy Sarah Miles. Please have a seat. We need to talk." Julie glanced warily at Sarah, then back at Tom. "I need a shower first," she said dismissively, brushing past him. "Not this time, Julie," Tom said sharply, his tone brooking no argument. "Sit down. We're doing this now." Startled by the force in his voice, Julie hesitated before reluctantly sitting down across from Sarah. Tom took the chair at the head of the table, angled toward her. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a digital recorder, and pressed the button before placing it on the table. "I hope you don't mind if we record this conversation," Tom said, his voice calm but unyielding. "Given the circumstances, I think it's appropriate to advise you of your rights." Julie's eyes widened, panic beginning to creep into her expression. "What are you talking about?" Tom's voice was firm. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed to you. Do you understand these rights?" Julie stared at him, her voice trembling. "I understand, but I'm not one of your suspects, Tom. I haven't done anything wrong." "You are very much a suspect," Tom said coldly. "In fact, you're my primary suspect." He pulled out 2 sheets of paper and slid them across the table. "Do you recognize these?" Julie glanced at the documents, her brow furrowing. "Yes, they're the kids' birth certificates. What's this about?" "For the record," Tom said evenly. "Whose name is on the signature line?" "Mine," Julie replied. "On both of them." "Read the statement under your signature, please," Tom instructed. Julie hesitated before reading aloud. "Under penalty of perjury, I certify that the above is true and factual." "And who is listed as the father?" Tom asked, his voice tightening. Julie's eyes darted nervously between the papers and Tom. "You are," she said quietly. "Read the name," Tom said, his tone steely. Julie swallowed hard. "Thomas Jefferson Williams," she said softly. Tom pulled out another document and placed it before her. "This is a DNA test from Acme Labs. It compares samples from me, Andrew, and Marie. The results conclusively show that while Andrew and Marie are siblings, neither of them is biologically related to me. So, Julie, tell me, who is their father?" Julie's hands shook. "You are, Tom," she stammered, tears pooling in her eyes. Tom's gaze hardened. "Don't lie to me, Julie. Not anymore." He took a deep breath and gestured toward the laptop on the table. "Let me show you something," he said, clicking play on the video file. Julie's face drained of color as the footage rolled. The recording left no room for ambiguity. It captured her and Alf during their recent rendezvous, their words and actions damning. How did you get this?" Julie stammered, her voice quivering. "That's not the question," Tom shot back. "The real question is why you and Alf conspired to defraud me. You both admitted in this video that Alf is the biological father of Andrew and Marie. You knowingly and willingly put my name on their birth certificates. That's fraud, Julie." Her face contorted with anger. "Fine," she snapped. "I wanted Alf's children, not yours. Yes, I signed the certificates naming you as their father. It was my decision." Tom's voice dropped, icy and controlled. "It's not your right to commit fraud. What did you tell your co-workers about your relationship with Alf?" "That's none of your business," she spat. "Do you know Alice Blackstone?" Tom pressed. "Yes," Julie replied tersely. "Do you recall what you told her about our marriage?" Julie hesitated. "I might have told her we had an open marriage," she muttered. "But that wasn't true, was it?" Tom said, leaning forward. "No," Julie admitted reluctantly. "And what else did you tell her?" I said you were injured," Julie mumbled. "Injured how?" Tom asked. "That you were injured on duty and couldn't perform sexually," Julie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom leaned back, his expression stony. "So you lied to justify your affair, and you didn't stop there. You told others the same thing." Julie dropped her head, unable to meet his gaze. "Yes," she whispered. Tom exhaled, pushing back his chair. "I think we're done here." He nodded to Sarah, who stood and handed Julie a manila envelope. "Julie Williams, you've been served," Sarah said formally. Julie blinked in confusion as the weight of the moment sank in. "What is this?" she asked. "Divorce papers," Tom said coldly. "On the grounds of infidelity and fraud." Sarah's voice turned firmer. "Please stand, Mrs. Williams. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Julie's head snapped up. "What? Why?" "You're under arrest for 2 counts of paternity fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud," Sarah said, producing a pair of handcuffs. "This can't be happening," Julie cried, panic overtaking her. "Oh, it's happening," Tom said. "Fraud is a felony in this state. I suggest you get a lawyer." As Sarah led Julie to the patrol car, Julie turned, her face streaked with tears. "Tom, please," she sobbed. "I love you." Tom shook his head, his voice devoid of emotion. "If this is love, I'd hate to see what you'd do if you didn't care." He watched as Sarah drove away, leaving him standing alone. Though relief washed over him, it came with a deep sense of loss. For over 20 years, he had loved Julie. Now he had to face their children and explain the unimaginable betrayal that had torn their family apart. Tom arrived at Maggie and Cliff's house later that morning. his laptop in hand. When Maggie opened the door, her face was tight with worry. "Tom, what's going on?" she asked. "It's time to explain," he said grimly. "Where are the kids?" "In the backyard," Maggie replied. "I'll bring them in." Minutes later, everyone was gathered in the living room. Cliff, Julie's father, looked at Tom expectantly. "What's this about, son? Where's Julie?" Tom drew a steadying breath. "She's in county jail." Cliff's eyes widened. "Jail? What for?" Tom glanced at Andrew and Marie, his heart breaking. "What I'm about to tell you will hurt, but you deserve the truth." Looking at the children, he continued. "Your mother, she lied to me. She lied to all of us. I'm not your biological father." Marie gasped. "That's not true. You're our dad." Tom's voice softened. "I raised you. I love you. But biologically, I'm not your father." The room fell into a stunned silence. Tom continued, his voice steady. "Before I met your mother, she was engaged to a man named Alf Henriksen. She wanted to marry him and have his children, but he made it clear he didn't want the responsibility of fatherhood. So she decided to have his children anyway, without his commitment." Maggie's face paled as recognition dawned. "I remember him. Tall, blonde, Scandinavian-looking. I even have an old picture of them." She left the room and returned moments later with a photo album, flipping through the pages until she found what she was looking for. Handing the picture to Cliff, she watched as his expression darkened. The resemblance between Alf and the children was undeniable. Tom nodded. "That's him. Julie and Alf worked together to list me as the father on your birth certificates, fully aware it wasn't true." Andrew frowned. "Wait, so Mom's in jail because she cheated on you?" "No," Tom explained firmly. "She's in jail for paternity fraud. When she signed those birth certificates, she committed a felony. It's a serious crime in this state." Marie's lip quivered. "What happens to us now? Are we going to lose you too?" Tom leaned forward, his voice softening. "Never, sweetheart. I've already petitioned for custody of both of you. I may not be your biological father, but I raised you, and I've loved you both every single day of your lives. I'm not going anywhere." Marie broke down, rushing into Tom's arms. "I love you, Daddy," she sobbed. Andrew stood frozen for a moment, then walked over, tears streaming down his face. "Am I still your son?" he asked quietly. Tom pulled him into the embrace. "Of course you are. You'll always be my son." The three of them held each other tightly, their tears mingling as they found strength in their bond. "I love you, Dad," Andrew said. "I love you too, son," Tom replied, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll get through this. Together." Cliff cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "What happens to Julie now?" "She's being held in county jail," Tom said. "The DA is pursuing charges, and they're working to extradite Alf to face conspiracy charges as well. Julie may call you from jail." Maggie's face fell. "What if she's released on bail?" "She might ask to stay here," Tom said calmly. "But I've already packed her belongings. They're in the garage." Just then, the phone rang, cutting through the tense atmosphere. All eyes turned to it. Maggie answered, her voice firm as she greeted her daughter. Julie's frantic and tearful voice echoed faintly through the receiver. It took Maggie several moments to calm her enough to speak. "Julie, listen to me," Maggie said sternly. "Tom has told us everything, and I have to say, I'm deeply disappointed. If you didn't want to have Tom's children, you never should have married him." Julie's response was muffled, but Maggie cut her off sharply. "No excuses. You broke the law, Julie. We raised you better than this. If you're released on bail, you can stay here. But don't expect sympathy from us. The kids are staying with Tom." More muffled protests came through the line. Maggie turned to Andrew and Marie. "Do you want to speak with your mother?" The children exchanged a glance, their expressions hardening. "No way!" they shouted in unison. Tom and Cliff couldn't help but laugh softly at their bold response. Maggie turned back to the phone. "I'm sorry, Julie, but they're not ready to talk to you. Maybe after they've had time to process this. We'll look into finding you a lawyer. But for now, goodbye." She hung up, her lips pressing into a thin line. Cliff sighed heavily. "Well, she's got a lot of growing up to do." Maggie softened as she looked at Tom and the kids. "How about they stay here one more night? That'll give you time to settle at home." Andrew nodded, and Marie agreed. Maggie turned to Tom, her eyes filled with compassion. "Go home, Tom. Take care of yourself. You've been through enough." Tom hugged her tightly. "Thank you," he said before shaking Cliff's hand. Turning to his children, he hugged them both. "I'll pick you up tomorrow. I love you." "We love you too, Dad," Marie said, her voice trembling with emotion. On Monday, Julie appeared in court for her arraignment. District Attorney Marvin Morrison argued persuasively, highlighting the gravity of her crimes and the risk of flight. The judge ordered her held without bail to prevent her from fleeing to New York to be with Alf. 3 months later, Julie's trial concluded. A jury found her guilty of 2 counts of paternity fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison with parole eligibility after 6. Her company terminated her employment following the verdict. Alf was extradited and convicted on similar charges. He received a 5-year sentence with eligibility for parole after 3. Tom's civil suit against Alf resulted in a significant financial settlement, which Tom placed in college funds for Andrew and Marie. The divorce was finalized soon after. Lucy's careful legal strategy ensured Julie received only 30% of their shared assets. Tom ensured those funds would be accessible to her upon her release, but neither he nor the children visited her in prison. After one traumatic visit, Marie refused to go back, and Andrew supported her decision. Life slowly returned to normal. Andrew graduated high school and joined the Marine Corps, following in Tom's footsteps as a military police officer. Tom beamed with pride, bringing Marie to Andrew's graduation ceremony, a moment that brought the family closer. Tom continued his law enforcement career, eventually being promoted to captain after his mentor retired. Despite his professional success, he showed no interest in dating, much to Marie's frustration. One day Marie handed him a note. "Here," she said, grinning mischievously. "Miss Harris, my English teacher, wants to meet you." Tom raised an eyebrow. "This isn't one of your matchmaking schemes, is it?" "Who, me?" Marie replied innocently. The next day, Tom met Miss Harris, who greeted him warmly. When their hands met, he felt a spark he hadn't felt in years. "Call me Brenda," she said with a smile. "And you must be Captain Williams." "Tom," he corrected. "Marie said you wanted to see me." "She may have exaggerated," Brenda said playfully. "But it's nice to meet the father of one of my favorite students. I hear you're single." Tom chuckled nervously. "Marie likes to meddle. Are you?" Brenda's eyes twinkled. "I am. Maybe we should let her meddle a little." Tom grinned. "Dinner?" Brenda nodded. "Let's see where this goes." For the first time in years, Tom felt hope for a new beginning.
But they'd failed to account for one crucial factor. They'd chosen the wrong man to betray. Salvador called the next morning. "They're getting desperate. Walter tried to access some of your medical records at the hospital. Let me guess, records that might support their abuse claims?" "Exactly. But the hospital's internal audit caught it. His unauthorized access has been logged and reported." Jeffrey nodded, adding this development to his files. "They're making mistakes. Big ones," Salvador agreed. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Jeffrey replied, and meant it. Everything's proceeding according to plan. The following days saw Annie and Walter growing increasingly frantic. Their carefully constructed scheme was unraveling thread by thread. Every move they made was anticipated and countered. Every attempt to salvage their plan only provided Jeffrey with more evidence. Their mutual friends, sensing something was wrong, began asking questions. Annie's attempts to maintain her narrative of Jeffrey's emotional abuse fell apart under the weight of years of contradictory evidence. Walter's professional reputation took its first hits as rumors of his ethical breaches began circulating in medical circles. Jeffrey watched it all with the detached interest of an engineer observing a controlled demolition. Each desperate action by Annie and Walter weakened their position further. Their dream of escaping with Jeffrey's assets and reputation intact was crumbling, and they had no one to blame but themselves. As the 2 weeks drew to a close, Jeffrey had everything in place. The trust funds for the children were established and secured. His assets were protected. The evidence was organized and documented. Annie and Walter's attempts to seize control had been thwarted at every turn. They had spent 18 years constructing their deception. Jeffrey had needed only 14 days to dismantle it completely. Now all that remained was to wait for the perfect moment to bring their entire scheme crashing down around them. The morning of Michael's high school graduation dawned bright and clear. Jeffrey Anderson stood in his kitchen at 5 a.m., methodically arranging documents on the marble countertop. The DNA test results lay beside the divorce papers, each page a nail in the coffin of Annie's carefully constructed deception. Salvador Emery had already filed the divorce papers the previous day, ensuring everything was legally in motion before the reveal. The grounds were clear: adultery and fraud spanning nearly 2 decades. The documentation was exhaustive, leaving no room for contest or denial. "Everything's in place," Salvador had confirmed during their final meeting. "The trust funds are ironclad. Each child's education and future are secured, completely separate from the divorce proceedings." Jeffrey placed 3 sealed envelopes beside the documents, each bearing the name of one of his children. The letters inside contained everything they needed to understand: bank statements showing Annie's systematic theft, email exchanges between her and Walter plotting their deception, medical records revealing Walter's manipulation of paternity information, and most importantly, Jeffrey's own words to each child. To Michael, he wrote about pride, not in academic achievements or athletic victories, but in the young man's growing sense of integrity. He included proof of the college trust fund, ensuring his eldest wouldn't have to compromise his future. Emma's letter acknowledged her passion for music and art, traits Annie had always dismissed as impractical. Jeffrey had established a separate fund for her artistic pursuits, ensuring she could follow her dreams without financial constraint. For Nathan, the youngest, Jeffrey included tickets to the gaming convention they'd planned to attend, paid for and transferable. His letter emphasized that family wasn't about DNA but about choice and love. The sound of movement upstairs signaled the beginning of the day's choreographed destruction. Jeffrey had already removed his essential belongings from the house, leaving behind the trappings of the life Annie had planned to steal. Annie entered the kitchen first, already dressed for the graduation ceremony in an expensive dress bought with Jeffrey's money. She froze at the sight of the documents on the counter. "What's this?" Her voice wavered despite her attempt at authority. "The truth," Jeffrey replied simply, pushing the DNA results forward. "Though I suspect you're already familiar with it." Annie's face drained of color as she scanned the papers. "These are fake." "You can't." "Fake? Like the past 18 years of our marriage? Like Walter's medical records? Like your love? You don't understand." Annie's voice took on the manipulative tone she perfected over years. "I did it for the children." "No," Jeffrey cut her off. "You did it for yourself. And now you can live with the consequences." Heavy footsteps on the stairs announced Michael's arrival. He entered the kitchen in his graduation robes, stopping short at the tension-filled scene. "Dad? Mom? What's going on?" "Your mother was just about to explain," Jeffrey said calmly. "About the paternity tests. About her plans for after your graduation. About Walter." Michael's face showed recognition. He'd carried the weight of his mother's revelation for weeks. Annie turned to him desperately. "Michael, honey, you don't understand. Your father is trying to—" "To what, Mom?" Michael's voice was hard. "To expose what you told me? About how none of us are his kids. About taking his money after graduation?" Emma and Nathan appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock as they saw the documents spread across the counter. "There are letters for each of you," Jeffrey said, gesturing to the envelopes. "Everything is explained inside, along with proof. The choice of what to do with that information is yours." Annie lunged for the papers, but Jeffrey had anticipated this. Copies were already safely stored with Salvador, and digital versions were secured in multiple locations. "You can't do this." Annie's composure cracked. Walter and you have lost," Jeffrey stated flatly. "The divorce papers are filed. Your secret accounts are frozen. The trust funds for the children are beyond your reach." Annie's phone buzzed. "Walter, right on schedule." Jeffrey allowed himself a small smile as she answered. "Walter? They know. He knows everything." She listened, her face contorting. "What do you mean your privileges are suspended? How can they? The medical board?" Jeffrey watched his children read their letters, their worlds shifting on their axes. Emma's hands trembled as she read about her mother's deception. Nathan's jaw clenched at the revelations about Walter. "I've transferred ownership of my company's shares to a protected trust," Jeffrey announced, his voice carrying the same precision he used in engineering presentations. "The house mortgage has been reassigned. Your credit cards will be deactivated by noon. You can't just leave us with nothing." Annie shrieked. "Nothing?" Jeffrey's voice was ice. "Like what you planned for me. At least I've ensured the children are provided for. That's more than you and Walter intended to do with my assets." The doorbell rang. Salvador Emery, right on time. Annie's face showed the first traces of fear as the lawyer entered, carrying additional documentation. "Mrs. Anderson," Salvador said formally, "I have some papers requiring your immediate attention." What followed was a systematic dismantling of Annie's carefully constructed future. Salvador detailed the legal consequences of her actions, the fraud, the financial theft, the conspiracy with Walter. Each point was supported by irrefutable evidence. Jeffrey watched Annie's desperate attempts to salvage control, to twist the narrative, to paint herself as the victim. But the documentation was too thorough, the evidence too damning. "The children need me," she tried, a last desperate plea. "No, Mom," Michael spoke, his voice firm. "We needed the truth. Dad gave us that, along with a choice." Emma and Nathan stood with their brother, their unity a silent testimony to Jeffrey's years of genuine parenting versus Annie's manipulation. "I'll be leaving now," Jeffrey announced. "The letters explain everything else you need to know. The trust funds are active, your educations and futures are secure." He turned to Annie. "Goodbye, Annie. Walter's probably waiting for your call, though I suspect his support might be somewhat diminished now that your plans have fallen apart." As Jeffrey walked out of the house for the last time, he heard Annie's phone ring again. Her conversation with Walter confirmed everything. Their perfect plan was in ruins, their reputations shattered, their futures uncertain. The aftermath unfolded exactly as Jeffrey had orchestrated. Annie and Walter's attempts to contest the divorce failed against the mountain of evidence. Their mutual friends, presented with proof of their decades-long deception, turned away in disgust. Walter's medical license came under intense scrutiny when his falsification of medical records came to light. His privileged position, used to help hide his affair and manipulate paternity records, became the instrument of his downfall. Jeffrey didn't stay to watch the collapse. He had planned a complete departure. New city, new opportunities, new life. His revenge wasn't in destroying Annie and Walter's plans. It was in rising above their betrayal while ensuring they faced the consequences of their choices. The graduation ceremony proceeded as scheduled, the though with a very different outcome than Annie had planned. Instead of being her moment of triumph, it became the public beginning of her downfall. Later that day, Salvador called to confirm the final details. Everything's proceeding as planned. Annie's attempts to access the accounts have been blocked. Walter's lawyer is already trying to negotiate. No negotiations, Jeffrey replied firmly. They chose their path. Now they can walk it. The trust funds he'd established would ensure his children's futures remain secure. The letters he'd left would ensure they understood the truth. His departure would ensure Annie and Walter faced the full impact of their actions without him there to blame or manipulate. News spread quickly through their social circle. Annie's careful narrative of Jeffrey's emotional distance crumbled in the face of evidence showing her long-term deception. Walter's professional reputation, built over decades, collapsed under the weight of his ethical violations. Jeffrey's final act was to send an email to their mutual friends, attaching key pieces of evidence that exposed the full scope of Annie and Walter's betrayal. He didn't need to embellish or explain. The facts spoke for themselves. As his plane took off that evening, Jeffrey reflected on the precision of his response to their betrayal. Annie and Walter had spent 18 years constructing their deception, planning to take everything he'd built. Instead, they would spend years facing the consequences of their choices, while the children they'd used as pawns would have the freedom to choose their own paths. The structural engineer who'd built his career on ensuring things stood strong had orchestrated the perfect controlled demolition of his marriage, ensuring that only the guilty parties would be caught in the collapse. 4 years passed like blueprints through Jeffrey Anderson's hands, precise, measured, each detail in its place. Seattle had proven the perfect location to rebuild his life. The city's perpetual rain and soaring skyscrapers matched his methodical nature, and his reputation as a structural engineer had only grown stronger. His corner office at Wilson and Anderson Engineering overlooked the city he'd helped reshape. 3 major projects bore his signature: a revolutionary earthquake-resistant hospital, a sustainable corporate headquarters, and a bridge that local newspapers called a work of art. The morning Michael found him, Jeffrey was reviewing plans for his newest project. His secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Anderson, there's a young man here to see you. He says his name is Michael." Jeffrey's hand stilled over the blueprints. He'd known this day might come. He'd left enough breadcrumbs in his carefully crafted exit for his children to follow if they chose to. "Send him in, Claire." Michael entered, taller than Jeffrey remembered, carrying himself with the confidence of a college senior. His features, so like Walter's, had matured, but his eyes held the same integrity Jeffrey had always seen in them. "You weren't easy to find," Michael said, standing just inside the door. "That wasn't the point," Jeffrey replied, gesturing to a chair. "The point was that you could find me if you wanted to." Michael sat, studying the man who'd raised him. Mom lost everything. The house, her friends, her reputation. All of it. And Walter? A bitter smile crossed Michael's face. Left her the moment the divorce settlement came through. "Turns out his love was as fake as hers." Jeffrey nodded, unsurprised. "And your siblings?" "Emma's thriving at art school. The trust fund you set up made that possible. Nathan's finishing high school, top of his class in computer science. We all read the letters. We understood why you left." The silence between them held years of unspoken words. Jeffrey waited, letting Michael find his voice. "Mom lives in a 1-bedroom apartment now, works at Marshall's folding clothes. She tries to contact us constantly, begging for forgiveness, saying she's changed." Michael's voice hardened. "None of us want anything to do with her." "That's your choice to make," Jeffrey said. "I made sure you'd have that freedom." Walter's medical license was suspended, Michael continued. The review board found more cases of falsified records. His wife left him, took half of everything. Last I heard, he moved to Arizona to start over. Jeffrey's expression remained neutral. The fate of his betrayers meant nothing to him now. "Your mom told us you were emotionally distant," Michael said, leaning forward, "that you cared more about your buildings than us. But you're the one who made sure we were taken care of, who gave us the truth, who let us choose our own paths." "DNA doesn't make a father," Jeffrey replied simply. Michael pulled out his phone, showing pictures of Emma's art exhibitions and Nathan's robotics competitions. We've been keeping track of your projects too. That hospital design in Portland? Nathan says it's brilliant. The conversation flowed easier after that. Michael shared stories of college life, his plans for graduate school, the ways he and his siblings had supported each other through the aftermath of their parents' deception. Emma and Nathan want to see you, Michael said finally. When you're ready. They understand if you don't. I'd like that, Jeffrey cut in. The children he'd raised choosing to return to him meant more than any victory over Annie and Walter. Over the next few months, Emma and Nathan visited separately. Each meeting healed another piece of what Annie and Walter had tried to destroy. Emma, her artistic soul wrapped in quiet strength, brought photos of her installations. The trust fund changed everything, she told him. Mom always said art was a waste of time, that I needed to be practical like her. But you believed in me even after. I believed in you because of who you are, Jeffrey replied. That hasn't changed. Nathan, nearly as tall as Jeffrey now, talked technology and engineering with the enthusiasm Jeffrey remembered. Your letter helped me understand what integrity really means, he said during one visit. Watching Mom and Walter fall apart, seeing how their lies caught up with them, it taught me what not to be. Their mother's attempts to re-enter their lives became a constant background noise they all ignored. Annie's calls, texts, and emails painted a picture of a desperate woman facing the consequences of her choices. She showed up at my dorm, Emma reported during one visit. Said she was a changed person, that she'd learned her lesson. But all I could think about was how she and Walter plotted to take everything from you. Nathan's encounter with his mother at a grocery store revealed how far she'd fallen. She was wearing a marshal's uniform, looked so different from the woman who used to host dinner parties and plan our lives. She tried to hug me, started crying when I walked away. Jeffrey's success grew with each passing year. His firm's reputation for innovation and integrity attracted major clients across the country. The irony wasn't lost on him. While Annie folded clothes and Walter rebuilt his practice in Arizona, Jeffrey's wealth and influence had multiplied. Your mother keeps trying to friend me on social media, Claire, his secretary, mentioned one day. Should I block her? She's not worth the effort, Jeffrey replied. Let her see what she lost. The children's visits became more frequent. Family dinners at Jeffrey's penthouse apartment replaced the forced gatherings of their past. They built new traditions, stronger for being chosen rather than obligated. Michael brought his fiancée to meet Jeffrey first, before any other family. You're the one whose opinion matters, he explained. Emma sought Jeffrey's advice about gallery showings and commissions. Nathan called to discuss engineering concepts and career choices. The family they rebuilt wasn't bound by DNA, but by something far more powerful: truth, respect, and conscious choice. Annie's betrayal had cost her everything she'd schemed to obtain, while Jeffrey's integrity had given him something far more valuable than what he'd lost. Do you ever regret how thoroughly you destroyed their plans? Michael asked during one evening, watching the Seattle sunset from Jeffrey's balcony. Jeffrey considered the question. Regret would imply they deserved mercy. Your mother and Walter spent 18 years plotting to take everything I built, using my love for you three as a weapon. They earned every consequence. The children understood. They'd seen firsthand how betrayal masquerading as love could destroy foundations thought unshakable. More importantly, they'd witnessed how integrity and strength could build something even stronger from the ruins. Annie's desperate attempts at contact continued through the years, each ignored with the same finality as Jeffrey's execution of his revenge. Her messages spoke of loneliness, of regret, of a changed heart, words as empty as her promises had been. Mom's getting desperate, Emma reported after another failed attempt at reconciliation. She actually suggested family counseling, said we could all heal together. Jeffrey's response was characteristically direct. Healing implies she has something worth saving. She made her choice 18 years ago. Now she can live with it. The contrast between their lives grew starker with each passing year. While Jeffrey's firm expanded to new cities and his children flourished in their chosen paths, Annie's world remained confined to her small apartment and retail job. Walter, rebuilding a modest practice in Arizona, had remarried but lost that family too when his past caught up with him. Your revenge wasn't anything you did to them, Nathan observed during one of their regular dinners. It was succeeding without them, being happy despite them, and letting them watch from the sidelines. Jeffrey smiled at his youngest's insight. The best revenge is building something they can never touch. As the years passed, Jeffrey's definition of success evolved. It wasn't measured in the buildings he designed or the wealth he accumulated, but in the family that chose to return to him. Michael's wedding, Emma's gallery openings, Nathan's graduation. Each milestone celebrated without Annie marked another victory of substance over deception. The family photographs in Jeffrey's office told the new story: 3 children who chose truth over convenience, integrity over betrayal, and a father who earned their love through actions rather than biology. Annie's betrayal had cost her everything she valued, while Jeffrey's principles had given him something far more precious: a family bound by choice rather than obligation. His revenge wasn't in the calculated destruction of Annie and Walter's plans, but in the peace and success he found without them, and in the love his children chose to give him even after learning the truth. The price of betrayal had been everything Annie held dear, while the reward for integrity was a family stronger than blood. Epilogue. 10 years after Jeffrey Anderson's masterful dismantling of Annie and Walter's scheme, the consequences of their betrayal continued to shape their lives in ways they never anticipated. Annie Morgan, she'd reverted to her maiden name after even Walter abandoned her, still worked the evening shift at Marshall's. Her small one-bedroom apartment in the less desirable part of Rochester stood in stark contrast to the life she'd once planned to steal. The designer clothes and luxury cars had been replaced by clearance rack outfits and bus passes. Her attempts to rebuild her social standing had failed spectacularly. Former friends who'd once attended her lavish dinner parties now crossed the street to avoid her. The county club membership had been revoked after the truth about her affair with Walter emerged. Her weekly routine consisted of folding clothes, stocking shelves, and watching through social media as her children celebrated life's milestones without her. "Did you see the photos from Michael's daughter's christening?" she asked her only remaining friend, a fellow retail worker, during their lunch break. Jeffrey was there. "He's a grandfather now, and I wasn't even told about the pregnancy." Walter Wiley's fall proved equally spectacular. After the medical board suspended his license in Rochester, his attempt to rebuild in Arizona crumbled when his past caught up with him. His second wife left after discovering his history of deception, taking half of his already diminished assets. Now in his early 60s, Walter ran a small medical consultation business in Phoenix, his practice limited to reviewing files rather than treating patients. His reputation, once sterling, carried an asterisk that no amount of time seemed to erase. The medical board's investigation had revealed other ethical breaches beyond falsifying the Anderson children's records, suggesting a pattern of professional misconduct that spanned his entire career. Dr. Wiley's recommendations will be taken under advisement became the standard response from hospitals and insurance companies, code for his opinion carrying little weight. Meanwhile, Jeffrey's empire had grown beyond even his careful planning. Wilson and Anderson Engineering now had offices in 6 major cities, with Jeffrey's innovative designs reshaping skylines across the country. His memoir, Building on Integrity, A Structural Engineer's Journey, became required reading in engineering programs, though it never mentioned Annie or Walter by name. The children's lives reflected the strength of choosing truth over convenience. Michael, now a successful corporate lawyer, had married Sarah, a pediatric surgeon. Their daughter, Claire, became the center of Jeffrey's world. He designed and built them a home that architectural magazines featured as a perfect blend of form and function. Emma's artistic career flourished. Her installations, exploring themes of truth, deception, and chosen family, showed in galleries worldwide. She'd found love with Rebecca, a gallery curator who understood the power of art to heal old wounds. Jeffrey walked her down the aisle at their wedding, while Annie learned about it through a local newspaper article. Nathan followed in Jeffrey's footsteps, but in his own way. His software company specialized in structural analysis programs, combining his father's engineering precision with his passion for technology. He married his college sweetheart, Maria, and their twin boys spent weekends in Jeffrey's workshop, learning about building things that last. The annual Anderson family gatherings at Jeffrey's Seattle penthouse became legendary in their social circle. Children, spouses, and now grandchildren celebrated holidays and milestones, their bond stronger for being chosen rather than merely inherited. Annie's Christmas cards to her children, sent faithfully each year, remained unopened before being discarded. Her attempts to contact her grandchildren through social media were blocked. The trust funds Jeffrey established had ensured that neither she nor Walter could ever use money as leverage to regain access to the family. "Your mother was at the mall again," Sarah told Michael one evening. She tried to approach Claire. "Did she tell you what happened to her real grandmother?" Michael had asked, referring to Jeffrey's mother, who'd become the loving grandmother Annie could never be. Walter's third marriage dissolved after his new wife discovered his pattern of infidelity. His adult children from his first marriage, learning of his betrayal of the Andersons, cut contact. His medical consultation business barely covered his alimony payments, and his attempts to publish in medical journals were met with polite rejections. Karma, as Emma observed during one family dinner, doesn't need help when truth does its work. The mutual friends who'd initially believed Annie's lies about Jeffrey's emotional distance now sought his advice on business and personal matters. His reputation for integrity and strategic thinking had only grown stronger with time. Several had invested in his firm, their faith rewarded by his consistent success. Jeffrey's relationship with his children deepened with each passing year. He became the confidant they turned to for major life decisions, the grandfather who never missed a recital or game, the father who showed them that character trumped biology. The family photographs in his office told the story of triumph over betrayal. Michael's law school graduation, Emma's first solo show, Nathan's company launch. Each image captured a moment of success built on the foundation of truth Jeffrey had laid. Annie watched this happiness from the periphery of social media and local news coverage. Her small apartment's walls held photos of the children from before the revelation, frozen in time like her dreams of the life she tried to steal. Walter, reduced to consulting from a home office in Phoenix, sometimes Googled his former medical practice, now a thriving clinic under new ownership. His medical license remained permanently restricted, his name a cautionary tale in ethics seminars. Neighborhood children still pointed out Annie at the Marshall store, whispering about the woman who lost everything because of her lies. She'd aged beyond her years, the stress of her downfall etched into her face. The designer anti-aging creams had been replaced by drugstore brands, her salon visits by home dye kits. Jeffrey, in contrast, had grown distinguished with age. His success attracted attention from younger women, but he remained focused on his family and work. His reputation as one of the nation's premier structural engineers was matched only by his standing as a devoted father and grandfather. "How do you feel about Mom now?" Nathan asked during one family gathering, watching his twins play with their cousins. "I don't," Jeffrey replied simply. "She's not worth the energy of feeling anything." The price of betrayal had been complete. Annie and Walter had lost not just their material comforts and social standing, but the very things they tried to steal: family, respect, and peace. Their punishment wasn't in any single action Jeffrey had taken, but in the daily reminder of all they'd thrown away. The legacy of their betrayal served as a reminder that true family transcended biology, that integrity outlasted deception, and that the most devastating revenge was living well in plain sight of those who tried to destroy you. Jeffrey Anderson's greatest victory wasn't in the buildings he designed or the wealth he accumulated, but in the family that chose him, the respect he maintained, and the peace he found in knowing that justice sometimes worked exactly as designed. For Annie Morgan and Walter Wiley, the real punishment wasn't in losing their material possessions or social status, but in watching from the sidelines as the family they tried to destroy thrived without them, bound together by something stronger than the lies they'd thought would never be discovered. The price of betrayal, it turned out, was paid not just in lost assets and opportunities, but in the daily recognition that some choices carried consequences that no amount of time could erase.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.